Thanks, Amy. So I just wanted to pick up a little bit and broaden out from what Amy was saying a little bit there. I mean, Amy's talked very much about how important the community was when you're at home, and we've created perhaps what we would call a hypomobile society there, where lots of localness has really helped bring us together. And it's an important point to make that, you know, lots of older people have supported lots of other older people in all of this. As well as lots of communities coming together. Again, that asset approach to this. But we can't forget, perhaps, you know, where this illness, where the virus has come from and where it's spreading. You know, the fact that we create this opposite of what Amy's described there, a real hyper-mobile society where we're traveling all around the world. We think nothing of living and working in lots of different international places and spaces. And without thinking about possible consequences of this, or being able to control it when it did. I mean, it's no surprise that where it first took off, even if it didn't originate there from Wuhan, is one of the best connected internationally centers in the world, if anyone's been there. Huge airport, huge links to the rest of China, big center for people coming into China. And, you know, our inability, particularly perhaps in the UK, and there's been some other countries as well, to stop that international travel has been at detriment to how long the lockdowns had to continue, and potentially also contributing to deaths and beyond that. So we need to think differently about how we go about mobility in the future. You know, it's not to say we shouldn't be mobile, but we shouldn't take it for granted. It isn't a right or something that we have just been able to do. On an interesting point for us transport researchers, we saw huge changes in people's mobility with the lockdown coming on. Lockdowns affect people's mobility, you know, the stay-at-home orders that countries have. Here's a graph from the UK just showing the changes in that. You can see from this time last year how vehicles fell, you know, 70–80%, buses probably a little bit more, and trains, as we were discussing earlier with Annette, you know, even further from that. But what happened on the other front is, you know, partly what Amy's talking about is much more localized mobility, if you like, or non-mobility. But walking and cycling really increased, particularly during those early stages of that lockdown, helped a little bit, I think, by nice weather and things like that. But, you know, made a big difference to how we move around the place. And of course, there's no guarantee that things will return to the rates they were before, although we've seen vehicle levels return perhaps at the end of last summer when lockdown was eased a little bit. As Annette was saying earlier, you know, there's potential that we will be changing our working habits, more people working at home, for example. So those local communities may become richer with people spending more time within them all. And we've got to maximize the benefit of that for everyone. Hopefully that could lead to less isolation and you know, reducing loneliness, for example, if we were to connect together in some of those ways that Amy said earlier on. So interesting study done sort of after the first lockdown last year about the things that older people missed. They missed getting out and about, but they particularly missed leisure travel. They were able to stay in touch with family and friends as well, remotely, but not all of them, and to different degrees. And all of them said it wasn't as good as actually seeing other people and being able to touch them, being able to hug people, being able to have conversations in real life space. Concerns about access to groceries, medication and essentials more than any other group. And interestingly, they thought about their social life and their relationships. That was as affected and as detrimental as potentially as sort of teenage people talked about, you know, teenagers and their high social lives. Older people talked about having their lives disrupted in very similar kind of ways, which gives you an idea again of perhaps intergenerational activities possibly coming together in the future to bring that together in some respects. As Amy said earlier as well, and other people have talked about, it wasn't just that older people are a victim of these kind of lockdowns. Lots of older people would help out. They checked on neighbours, they checked on other groups in their communities, which is, you know, really positive to see and really positive to see. And really important again for that localness and neighbourliness and connectivity. But we do know that not getting out and about does reduce in isolation and loneliness. And how do we go about improving that moving forward? If older people haven't been able to get out for a while, there's potentially physical changes in their body, might become more unsteady. difficult to maintain the skills, in particular, and again this has been mentioned throughout today, a lack of confidence of reusing the public space again, where people have been at home for long periods of time, in two ways really. Just because you've been out of practice for it, I mean, we're all a little bit anxious about going back to some form of normality, and assuming it will be like normal, but that's, you know, a real issue thinking about it moving forwards. But also because the new normal, you know, to coin a horrible phrase, has been it's changed people's understanding of how to use their local shops, how to use their local news agents, how to use their local co-op, how to use their local spa. It's different in there. You know, they've got different one-way systems in place. They've got different ways of paying for things and different layouts and different rules, and that's you know, anxiety making. There's an excellent project which I ought to mention, run by Natalie Elliott at Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, aimed mostly at people living with dementia, but about getting people out and about. They're creating really good local films about how to access local things, whether that's doctors, pharmacists going to the park, getting jabs, getting on a bus again. And you know, you can have a look at the link there for further details of how to create those yourself, or how to access the ones that are all out there. Really useful in trying to improve the confidence of older people, which has been messed about. You know, another way of doing it as well is to make sure we've got space to do this. So it's about reclaiming some of the infrastructure for walking and cycling. There's a need for people to be able to have 2 meters distance away from each other. There's been some great examples of that, some temporary pop-up cycle lanes, moving them away from cyclists, away from pedestrians, taking some of that space away from vehicles that haven't been haven't been used quite so much. In London, we've got low traffic neighbourhoods being created to stop through traffic and reintroducing people into their communities, giving them space in front of their homes back again, so you can do the things that Amy talked about in the communities earlier on. Changes, even small changes, like I think in Perth and Kinross in Scotland, they've given priority to pedestrians to cross the road without having to press a button to cross the road. In Manchester, they've changed 1,000 pedestrian crossings so you don't have to wait as long as a pedestrian at them. They changed to green so you don't have the build up of pedestrians in those areas. You know, little changes like that. And changes like we found in, you know, this was beautiful what they did in Cardiff in front of the castle, making this kind of boulevard for the cafes and restaurants and people to spill out into those areas and reclaim that space when pubs, restaurants were allowed to open outdoors. Sadly, that's been turned back into a road and that taken away. You know, we need to start thinking about, is this the kind of future we want? Do we want to go back to allowing, you know, hyper mobility, to prioritizing the car in all aspects above and beyond public transport, and certainly above and beyond walking and cycling? If we want to create the kind of neighborhoods and communities that have seen us through this pandemic and helped us through this area, we need to start thinking differently about them. Changes in you know, public transport need to take place. Well, there's lots of anxiety over using buses moving forward, and trains, as we talked about earlier. You know, social anxiety about how to go on there. Timetables have changed. The way of paying on the bus has changed. A lot of that can be overcome with a very friendly figure in front of the, you know, in front of representing the company. So the bus driver, or on the trains, the train manager, for example. We know that. But also, you know, lots of other things taking place on buses as well, such as deep cleaning them, having hand sanitizer on them, not allowing everyone to sit too closely together, and things like that for now. All really important about creating more safe and positive ways forwards for people. I think overall, I just wanted to finish, and it's probably quite poignant to finish the whole day on this front before we move to any questions and answers we might have, that we've really just got to involve older people more in how we rebuild society out of this. You know, I think everybody here would agree that today. It's just how we go about doing that and making sure their voice is heard in the rebuilding of society. At the moment, we've seen a huge acceleration of inequalities as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns associated with it. Normally, perhaps this happens in slow motion, and there's times to, you know, get a government intervention or charity, third sector intervention that disrupt some of that and change it. But we haven't had time to do that this time. But what it has done is create such a disruption, such a polarization, such a change, that there's time to have perhaps what we might call a project restart, a chance to have a look at what we're doing right and wrong, and a chance to rebuild things in a better way. You know, I think this is our real chance to say, you know, if we've enjoyed our new community life and our neighborhoods and enjoyed walking and getting out about more, if we're not going to be spending times in our offices, not traveling abroad quite so much, how do we redesign society to enable that and make it better, and make it better for those on our margins of society, or those that are often forgotten about in society? And I think that's really where I wanted to end.